this talk is called Beautiful and Right, but we could have called it How Things Fit Together in Programming Languages and on the Water, kind of like a Currently Away meets 7 languages in 7 weeks. So this story begins when Maggie and I moved from Austin, Texas to Chattanooga, Tennessee. One of the best things that we ever did. Great place. But we take walks almost every day along the Tennessee River, just right across the riverfront to downtown. And there are a lot of places along our walk where the land meets the water. And we were curious about these places for a number of years, like this place where the old steamboats used to come and drop their wares for market, or this place where you could tie up small boats or large boats. That's not a boat, that's Yeti. And here you can see that the same interface is broken. It's underwater. This happens a lot. And there are some tangles of metal that we didn't know what to do with mentally. We didn't know how these things fit together. So we dreamed about traveling by water for a number of years. Then our world fell apart a little bit. In 2020, so we did a conference together at Lone Star Elixir. Then we did a conference together, Francesco, at Codebeam. And that was the one where there was the hand sanitizer everywhere. So this was March 5th or something like that. And there was hand sanitizer everywhere. When I left for the conference, my plane was full. And when I returned, there were about a third of the people on the flight in what should have been a more populous site. People disappeared. And we were afraid. And I was especially afraid because when they showed those commercials with these 7 conditions that you have, that if you have them, you need not to go outside during COVID, I had 5 of them. 5. So Maggie and I were living as 2 people who thrive on connection, getting progressively more sad, progressively more depressed, and less alive every day. And then in 2022, we changed things, or more specifically, Maggie, who is not the excitable one in our relationship, she's not the adventure seeker in our relationship. She came up with this plan to trade this 2,000 square foot quarantine for a 290 foot quarantine with a bigger back porch. We went around 6,200 miles in America's Great Loop. 9 months, 19 states, 2 countries. And sometimes it was pretty hard. So there's no sound here, so make large splashing noises. So this day, it was supposed to be calm, and we were on our weather app saying, when are things going to calm down? Are they going to calm down enough for us to continue? It did not calm down. This was just a few minutes, like an hour or so later. But there were difficult moments like that, like 3 days into the trip where we had our tallest waves on the Tennessee River. We weren't actually into open water yet. They were 6 feet high. And there were also impossibly beautiful days like this picture taken just 2 days after the one in the waves that you saw a couple of minutes ago. But what I remember the most about the Great Loop is kind of this idea of possibility, or maybe curiosity, but what I wanted to do is spend a little bit of time kind of ripping back and forth between some of the magic I saw on the trip and some of the things that I see in programming languages, old ones and new ones, and just have some fun. It's the last talk of the day. So the first thing that I want to talk about is ideas. So in this case, river navigation systems, open water navigation systems, don't really require you to do what the buoys and markers say that you're supposed to do. It's just an understanding of the ideas. And in fact, if you're in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, there are times where you could just point the boat anywhere, and as long as your boat is enough, you can go pretty much where you want. Like the one night that we were outside of land and actually underway. We passed red number 4 around Dog Island near near Apalachicola. And then we went across the Gulf and didn't touch the helm or the throttle for 19 hours. 19 hours. We just kind of left it alone. We're just cruising along. And we passed red number 2. But there's no navigation system because there's no need. And that's the way I used to write code. The first language that I wrote in was BASIC, like a lot of people. And so this is basic code, and mine would look like, this, if this condition is true, then you have twisty-turny mazes all like, or something like that. But this is unstructured code, as I learned later in university, because there's one entrance and there are 2 exits, and that makes things hard to think about. And when you hear reason about today, it's different than it was then. Because today, we don't know if it's going to be a person doing the reasoning. These features, like structured programming, are becoming more and more important. But BASIC was not structured. And in fact, a lot of the languages at the time were not structured. Early versions of BASIC, Fortran, COBOL, pretty much all versions of assembly, these are not structured. But most of the great loop was not spent in the open water. It was spent in confined waterways, river systems like our Tennessee River, the intercoastal waterway, because most of the United States is circled by barrier islands. And so most of the places that we were, if the boat sank, we could stand on top of the boat and breathe. A lot of the loop, we could stand next to the boat and breathe. I kid you not. But a lot of us think about navigation systems, and we think about lighthouses like this one. And we think, that's a way to keep me from running into land, right? You see a light, and then eventually you say, oh, wait a minute, that's attached to something, a boat or the land or something. But it's more interesting than that, because once you know the rules that this lighthouse is painted red for a reason, like this lightship, then once you know that there's a rhyme or a reason, and there are rules surrounding the way in which these are placed and used and navigated with, then navigation gets much more simple. So most of the Great Loop we spent sailing between green buoys and red buoys. And a buoy is nothing more than an idea that there's safe water and unsafe water. So this buoy separates maybe shallow water, maybe rocks, maybe deep water. And the question is, which side is the good water on? Right? Turns out that there's a system of rules, an idea for this. Right? We learned that I keep the red buoy on the right-hand side, so the red stays on my right when I'm returning upstream. So you're cruising down the Tennessee River, you see a site that looks like this. There's a lot of room to the left, a lot of room to the right. But if you're returning, if you're going upstream, this is what you do. Keep the red buoy on the right-hand side when you're returning. So there were a number of places that we encountered like this one. Some of the most beautiful places on the loop were in Georgian Bay. And in fact, if you Google for the most beautiful cruising grounds, this is what you find. It's 30,000 islands that kind of weave in and out of Huron Bay. And there's a small ship channel Well, they say the small ship is 70 feet, but there's no way that those small ships can fit in some of the places that we went. At least I don't see how they could. And you can see the little marker like the one that's on the shore. So another thing about the red buoys, they were triangular. They were shaped like a triangle. And the green ones were shaped like squares. And once again, I'm going to keep my red on my when? Right. So that means the green is going to be on my, and so that's what you do. Right? And this happened day after day that we were in Georgian Bay. So there was this wild moment where we were in Georgian Bay. And by the way, it's not all calm like this. There are some days that the waves were kind of kicking up. And there is always, in bad weather days, there is always drama playing out on the radio. Like 2 of the maybe 6, 8 days that we went through the critical stretch of Georgian Bay, we heard boats slowly sinking that had hit the bottom. And they would say, hey, Coast Guard, how soon can you get to me? 3 hours, that's not soon enough. What are we going to do? Well, let me see if somebody else has a pump. And they would try to route them to the boat with a, and almost always, or every situation that we heard, things worked out okay. But anyway, as we were winding through these rocks, we got this anonymous message on this media app called Nebo. And it said, turn on your thrusters. Well, bow and stern thrusters are used when you're doing docking maneuvers. And we were 5 hours out of port. So we thought that this was an odd message. And so what did we do? Well, we turned on our thrusters. And we saw this tangle of red and green buoys. And so here we are, coming through this little passage. And you see the boat whip around like that. You see this tangle of buoys. Well, when it whips around, I'm actually engaging the thrusters because that's moving me sideways. Like right here, you're about to see there, we're kicking them in or coming around. We're not going to hit that rock. So that was kind of cool. But the idea is that when I was in waterways like the Jersey coast or waterways like the Cape Fear in North Carolina, it felt kind of sketchy because we weren't sure about the markings. But in Georgian Bay, it was really rocky and the markings were bang on. So we knew exactly where to be at the right time because we knew the rules. Structured programming. So when I went to university, like the old foolishness was cast aside and stopped doing that go-to stuff that got me in so much trouble. And I used a language called Pascal. Yeah. Okay. And the interesting thing about these operations, the if, the while, the function, you might see that there's one entry and there's one exit. And so you can compose with these ideas. And you can wrap them up with procedures, and you can compose with those ideas. So I have the markings and the rules, so I'm safe. And the entry and the exit seemed a lot like green and red buoys when I was on the loop. So I had the structure and the rules, so I'm safe. So here's where I know I made a terrible mistake, maybe 3 or 4 more minutes. So when my first professional job, I coded a little bit of C++, but most of it was Java. Not yet, it gets worse. So this is what my concurrency looked like. I would start and stop processes anytime I felt like it. And I was left with zombie processes because sometimes there wasn't anything monitoring the processes that were created earlier. Okay. Go ahead, Sasha. So I'm laughing because this guy is Brian Getz. He is the architect of Java, the Java language, and we met up in where were we? Burlington, Vermont. Yes. And he told me the way I should have been writing those programs. He said that Java is moving in the direction of structured concurrency. Now I know that this is an Elixir conference, but this is interesting, don't you think? That the Java community is thinking about how to do concurrency better and in a way that that keeps you safer, that is more predictable, that manages and thinks about life cycles. So here's what that looks like. My old processes should have been built like this, where I had a parent process and subtasks, and those subtasks are enveloped by the parent so that there's one start, all of them are spun up, and then by the time that the parent is closed down, everything is resolved. This is interesting, right? Because when you compose things, when you build things in this way, it can compose. And that looks a lot like a supervision tree, right? That's cool, right? And that's going into Java in a project called Loom and the Java Enterprise Process document 428. And I said, huh. So on the Great Loop, I also spent a lot of time thinking about the land-water interfaces because we bought the boat on dry land, right? This was literally in the parking lot of a mall. And I could still remember when they picked this thing up with a giant forklift and they're driving it amongst all of these Suburbans and the thing is rocking back and forth and everybody's looking around bored. And I'm thinking, we are inches from losing our life savings, right? So, but most of the land-water interfaces that we saw look like this one. This is a dock, and a dock is nothing more than an interface. Interface with the land, interface with the services of electricity, waste, and water. Sometimes there's an interface from low water to high water as well. And we saw a ton of these docks of all different types. Docks like this one in Mississippi, like a bustling dock, even in the midst of the winter. Or this one, just like a lonely commercial shrimper just sitting out in South Carolina. Or this one, kind of a lonely dock with our happy, trusty dog, Emmy. And that was just a couple hours south of home. But the commercial pleasure craft mixed-use docks were the worst, right? They never quite seemed to fit. And I've heard the same from the commercial craft also. Here's an example of the land-water interface in the C&D Canal. That's where the Chesapeake Bay meets the Delaware River. So you think, well, wait a minute, there's a lot of bay on either side of that, and there's a lot of water that shifts through there really quickly when the tides change, like even up to 4 or 5 miles an hour. So I'm filling up, thinking I don't want to fall down there and die. And there were other places where we tied up in unexpected places, like this was just about 30 minutes before sunset, and we were about to have to spend the night tied up to a dock or to a lock wall because a push boat had gotten a barge tow stuck sideways in the lock, and they were clearing that out. But one of the funniest land-water scenarios that I saw was 3 weeks ago, well after we had completed the Great Loop. And it was just a half-mile walk from home. Huh. This is a boat ramp. This is where they launch the ducks, those little duck boats. And we're thinking, what's the bell doing there? So we hung out to watch and kind of gawk, really. And then this fuel truck drives up, and we said, what is going on? Because they have this fuel line running back and forth and up to the boat, and the boat is like rocking back and forth. And we said, this can't be safe. This can't be the best way to do it, can it? And the funny thing about this is that there's a fuel dock within sight of the bell, right? So we were thinking, what's going on? And the best that I could say is that, yeah. Well, practical can be complicated. So the river was high. I don't know if that was it. The pumps go down sometimes. I don't know if that was it. Yeah. Or chief, yeah. So this is a dock in Paducah, Mississippi, Paducah on the Mississippi River. And Mississippi River? Ohio River. So it's a dock that is mostly empty for months and months and months. But it's busy when the Great Loop is kind of coming through town because it's a seasonal thing. All these boats are kind of coming through and kind of crammed onto this dock. But I was standing back here when this picture was taken, and I'm thinking, whoa, is that complicated? I mean, you have these floats and then these poles, and then the dock slides up the pole on rollers when the water's high, and then you have these angles on the top because, well, the dock might come up and then go back down, in which case it has to go back on clean, or it might go up and the river keeps rising, so you want it to break off clean. And then you have kind of the power that you have to serve, the fuel that you have to serve. Then not pictured is the waste that you have to deal with, and then the hinged rolling ramp. This is complicated. And you ask yourself, is it worth it? And every single boat on that dock says, yes, it's worth it, right? Because it's a beautiful interface. I just take the boat ride up, tie it off. There's no difference in the water elevation. And I have access to land, I have access to services, and I don't care about the complicated engineering of getting all the power and the water and the fuel and the rollers to work. I just don't care about that. So now I'm going to promise you the worst analogy that you're going to see in all of this conference. Apologies, Francesco. And I'm not saying that these spikes are related to anything, but I'm saying that we have these complicated pieces that fit together in supremely unnatural ways, right? We have recursion, and we have this actor-based model with processes built in it. We have these behaviors, and then we have macros. And if you're on the Erlang side, you have the editor macros. If you're on the Elixir side, you have the code macros. And then you have the links and the process monitors. And all of this comes together, and you think, whoa, can that be worth it? But I think it's worth it. Right? This is an interface. This is an interface between the common and the customizable. This interface is called the behavior that's wrapped up in a use-gen server, which is a macro on the Elixir side, and just a behavior on the Erlang side. And this behavior is a line between this generic process machinery and these custom plugins that represent our code. So I promised it was a bad analogy. Did I deliver? Yeah, there you go. But the cool thing is that I pushed the cost into the infrastructure, and that's why things feel right. Okay, it's getting late in the day. I thought that we could have some fun with locks. And so you could see kind of the weirdness on the Great Loop. So a lock is nothing more than an interface between low and high water, where you pull into this chamber, and then they close the doors and fill it up and open the doors for you to go upstream, or close the doors, empty it, and open the door for you to go out downstream to kind of even out the water that we have to traverse. But locks are dangerous places. So we went down the river with this boat called Argo, and this was a weird time because we left kind of in an unnatural time for the Great Loop, so it was really, really cold outside. This would have probably been like January 25th or something like that. And it was cold, and I mean really cold. This was a typical day, and that mattered because locks are dangerous places. And we saw a boat like this one pull into a lock, and then the doors closed, and then we watched him pull into the dock on our AIS system, which is he's a moving triangle. And then we're watching the doors, and they stay closed, and they stay closed, and there's a pause. And then on the radio we heard, "Are you going to let me out, Lockmaster?" And the Lockmaster said, "I need to talk to you first, Captain. You're being lax with your safety. I've seen 3 of your crew members out here without a life jacket on. And 2 days ago, we had somebody in the water. We had to pull him out. He was hypothermic. He's okay, almost wasn't. 2 weeks ago, we had a man die on the Ohio River in one of our locks." So we're thinking about that as we're coming down 10 days into our Great Loop. And then we get down to a lock called Coffeyville in Alabama. We're pulling up, and we see this boat, and it doesn't look right, and we realize that it's in the parking lot. That boat had sunk in the lock, right? This is me contemplating my life choices after the boat sunk in the lock. Great picture, Maggie. But locks are about 2 things for staying safe, and you have to stay on your toes. One of them is a need to preserve some isolation. And I do that by taking this boat hook and pushing out against the wall. And then there's fenders like the one at my foot there and the one that you could see just below the rope that keep me just far enough away. But I also have to go up in parallel concurrently with the floating bollard. So I have to be tied onto this system. So here's my second bad metaphor. So don't you love languages, right? Programming languages are great. This is a magical one for me. So this language says mutable state is easy. Shared state is easy. Shared mutable state is hard. So what Pony does is it enforces safe conditions via something called references. And they call the piece and the type a reference capability, right? So we control which references get created and control which capabilities you can do with each reference that gets created. That's part of the type system. So here's an example of a reference. I'm going to show you 2 of them. There are a lot of them. But if I want something that's fully isolated, I have a reference capability called ISO. And you think in 2 dimensions. First, what type of access does it provide? So in this, I could do read and write access. It's mutable, right? I can do anything to it that I want, but I can't share it. And then on the immutable shared side, well, for access, I can only read it, but I can share it for other references that can read. And if you do this, you can push some other references and other use cases. You can push those capabilities into the type system. And so Pony's philosophy is that shared mutable state is hard, so we're going to let the computer do the work. And so we have a contract. We build these reference capabilities into my types. And the contract is that I get compiler guarantees. Like, these reference capabilities give me no data races, no deadlocks, something called capability secure, and that has to do with the proof that, that says that Pony compiled programs are safe. You get causal message passing, which has to do with the order that messages are sent and received. Pony provides other guarantees with other capabilities like no crashes, no nulls, no uncaught exceptions. And it makes Pony applications hard to write, but feel right, because the guarantees that you get once you make it compile are pretty ironclad. Okay, now we're going to have some fun with locks. This is a lock that's rising in Ottawa. This would be kind of like having a lock rise right next to the Washington Monument, right? It's just it's a wild place. And here's a flight of 8 locks where you move into one lock, into one chamber, you come up and you go out of that chamber and into the next and the next and the next. And it feels so much like composed functions. Right? And this was my favorite day on the loop. So there was a boat that we ran up with that picked up a stranger at the bottom, and they got to share the local knowledge with the people that they picked up, and the people that they picked up got the opportunity to go through this magical system with a great looper, and they had a great time. So another thing that I think was cool about the locks in Canada was that most of them on the canal system were completely hand-operated and dead simple. And you could just see the infrastructure sitting out there. Most of the time, it was okay. One time, when we got to a lock in the morning, we looked over at the river and it was empty, right? Because somebody had, mischievously opened it up and emptied the river with a lock hardware, right? There were some locks that were, I don't know, you pick the adjective. So we literally pulled up onto this trailer, and then they hung a strap under the boat, and then they rolled this train over this little scrap of ground. Yes, it's as scary as it looks. That's wild, right? Does anybody remember those metal games that would shake, and then they had football players running around, and it was all fun and games until one of them fell off the edge of it? That's what we felt like. So people called this beautiful engineering. I couldn't ever get behind that, and I was glad that I was through it. This one I could get behind. Yes, that's what you think it is. What? That's cool, right? That's called the Peterborough lift lock, and it's not a mechanical thing. It moves the boats up and down with nothing but gravity, right? Hydraulics and gravity. Really cool. So I don't know about you, but I feel this way sometimes about programming languages. One language in particular, called Idris, just blows my mind. So the idea is that there are types and values, and in a language called Haskell, or in the Haskell language, which has a brilliant type system, this is what a simple program might look like. Well, I have the head of a list of A, and it returns an A, right? So you have the types on the top. The list of A, and the A might be a list of integers and returns an integer. And then you have the values on the bottom. So you have A conjoined, or X conjoined with other X's. You're going to return the first X. And the idea is that these concepts are separate. You have the types and you have the values, and then they never meet in the middle. Then there's this weird thing, this language. And it has values too, And this is a conjoin operation. So if you conjoin nil with some y's, you get the y's. If you conjoin a list of x's with y's, you take the first x and conjoin it with the tail of x and then the rest. But that's not the interesting part to me. That looks a lot like it would in Haskell. This is the interesting part. So you have the content types, right? So like maybe a vector, the first argument is a vector of integers, and the second one is a vector of integers. And then the third argument gives you a vector of integers, or the return value is a vector of integers. But what's interesting is that we can also specify a size in here, and that size is a value. So now I can say I have a vector of 6 integers and a vector of 5 integers, and when I can join them, I get a vector of 11 integers. And that is cool. And so I look at this code, and I feel the same way that I do when I look at that lift log. Right? I'm weird that way. So the last thing I want to talk about, I promise this won't take too long, is this idea of beauty. So we went to a lot of beautiful places on the loop. One after another after another. I mean, we've got pictures of sunsets that would just knock you out of your chair. We've got places like this in fjords in Canada. We've got pictures of beautiful white sand beaches. But the thing that we both remember is the people. All the beautiful, curious people. So you would run all day, mostly alone. And then we would bring out our technology, normally an app called Nebo. And we would see all the boats that were in our area. And Maggie, being the Great Loop communications director, unofficial of course, would gather all these people together. And we would have docktails and talked about what your spouse said to you when you docked the boat, right? And you would tell stories, right? And it struck me that the beauty wasn't in the seascapes. That it was about the people that shared them with you, or not the incredible technology on the loop. But the people that helped us work it. Not the cityscapes. True story. The buddy boat who didn't leave when the cops pulled us over. True story. Our boats, but the people who made room at their table. Our ideas. We got to spend some time with Frank and his daughter Alex on the loop. We got to spend time with Sophie and Stephen Nunez and Sophie De Benedetto, and got to watch the wonderful interactions with those people. But that's what technology is. That's why it's beautiful. It's not about being right. It's not about contracts or interfaces or abstractions. It's not about types. It's not about stuff. It's about us. This right here, right now. There are people behind those languages. This is where the beauty is. Thank you.